Okay. I'm going to add a title here. Let's see.
All right, guys, we are live. So I'm
Bernie.
just giving
No,
you a
no,
heads
we're
up.
not. We're not. Oh, you're live?
Yeah, we are. So just, no F. Well, say whatever you want. It's fine. I just don't want you to reveal anything where you're like, oh, God, I didn't want that to go out there. So just give it, it's the heads up, right? It's like you're in a car and you tell somebody, we're live, we're on the mic. So that's where we are.
Okay. This is Lauren Steiner
Here with Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
and the Robust Opposition. We are doing a joint edition, folks. We had a little trouble with Jamal's YouTube channel, so now we're doing it on my Facebook page and on your YouTube channel,
We're
Jamal.
doing it on both at the same time.
All right, this is awesome. Anyway, so I messaged you today. Have me on. I'm like I'm everything that like Bernie or these progressives do since he suspended his campaign is making me increasingly crazy.
Same here.
And you would think that I would be over this because I especially did not organize for Bernie this time because of my frustrations with the campaign last time. But this time it's even worse. I mean, at least last time he went to 2 weeks before the convention before he gave in. This time he gave in halfway through. It's like quitting the game at halftime. That's the analogy I use. So I thought that was pretty egregious. And the coronavirus was his excuse, which I can debunk. But before we get into like his suspending of his campaign, because we have a lot to talk about, what did you think about it when you first found out?
So my feeling on it, it's hard to explain because my feelings were complicated. There were feelings of regret, partially betrayal, this thing of hope that wasn't necessarily realized or not even necessarily prosecuted in order to kind of realize this contradiction between the revolutionary talk versus the timid activity of the campaign. Like it was a lot of stuff that was screwing with me in thinking about the campaign. My biggest feeling, though, when it came out of it was this understanding that it doesn't work. That what Sanders wants to do and the way he wants to run his campaign doesn't work. Campaign, it's like that's not the way politics works. And now he ends up in a situation where, after giving over all leverage, after pretty much giving over any thought that he would use his mob, his group, his people, the millions of people that support him in those policies, when that was off the table completely from day one, he had nothing. He walked out there, got a task force, which was basically a token unicorn that he's going to try to sell to his people to con them to vote for some random Democrat. That's what I felt about it. To some degree, I feel it's a betrayal in the very end because the way to get those policies accomplished is not within the party. The way to get those policies accomplished is tens of millions of people outside of a party structure standing under a banner of these are the policies we want. We're not associated with the parties because fact is, neither party has your interest in heart. So the idea that you continuously put your vote behind a Democrat, you've been doing this for 40 years. And over the course of the 40 years, Bernie Sanders is still saying, let's keep digging that ditch like something else is going to change by throwing your support behind a party that doesn't like you and your policies. That
Right.
stuff has to be done outside the party structure. And those people need to leave, flee in millions, and be willing to say, you will get my vote or not, depending upon what policies you accept or what
Right.
policies you don't. That's the only
Well,
path to getting anything accomplished.
right. Well, I agree with you. And here's the thing. The suspending the campaign thing didn't irk me so much as it surprised me because I did a live stream prior to his suspending the campaign called Occupy COVID-19. And the thesis of that live stream with two other Bernie delegates, two other California 2016 Bernie delegates, was that he could run a campaign like Occupy Sandy. Do you remember Occupy Sandy after Hurricane Sandy in 2012?
No.
Well, okay, so it was part of the Occupy Wall Street movement, and it was mutual aid, not charity. And it was actually deemed more successful than FEMA or the Red Cross because FEMA and the Red Cross, after that hurricane, would just dump big boxes of diapers or water bottles on some street corner. Occupy Sandy used neighbors to go building to building, house to house, finding out what people needed, and then providing that very specifically. So not only did it provide more efficient direct aid, it actually empowered people to take control of a situation. So you've heard the term change, not charity.
Right.
That's what Occupy Sandy did. So Bobby Charavaria who was a Bernie delegate from the Inland Empire, and Mike Wilson, who was a Bernie delegate from Northern California, and I talked about how Bernie's campaign could morph into a mutual aid campaign. In other words, they could go around social distancing, putting flyers under doors, basically finding out what people needed and seeing who was going to provide it. They could use his giant infrastructure to organize 50 houses, say, or 50 apartments.
Yeah.
And do a conference call like we used to have the Maestro call with Occupy, where you could have thousands of people on a call, and you could press 1 to agree, press 2 if you disagree. You could go into breakout rooms. It was a wonderful organizing vehicle. And of course, now we have Zoom, but he could have done that. And then that way he would have hit up Trump supporters. He would have hit up Biden supporters. And without even campaigning for himself, just saying this is the Bernie Sanders Mutual Aid Brigade or whatever he wanted to call himself, he would put a feeling into people subconsciously, who is working for me during this pandemic, right? So he thought, oh, we can't have voting, all the excuses I heard. Joe Biden is encouraging people to vote in Wisconsin. I don't want to do that. See, it didn't matter what he said with Bernie, as usual. No matter what he said was twisted by the media. So he should have just gone balls out on this strategy. And then after he endorsed him, this is when I really got angry, because I heard that he endorsed him for, like you said, 6 task forces. And everybody knows that a task force is useless. It's like the platform, you know?
It's meaningless. Yeah.
I don't even know why he's trying to get delegates for this platform, because the platform is useless.
Same here. I kept saying the same thing. I kept saying it's a unicorn. It doesn't mean anything. This guy, it's one of those things. It's a face-saving maneuver that doesn't mean squat. I got you guys a task force for the platform, and I'm going to fight hard for a platform that doesn't ultimately matter. It's diverting energy into nothingness. I mean, my annoyance in this. So it's funny. My thought was slightly different, and it was different more in the sense of the reason. So my thought was the reason, and part of the reason that Sanders lost was because he could never contrast himself. He refused to do so with Biden and the things that Biden was doing, especially things that Biden has got doing in the past that Biden continued to do here that nobody said anything about. So, for example, he loses the black vote. He also loses the elderly vote, and he loses the argument on electability. And the moment that he loses the argument on electability, the black vote goes along with it. To some degree, the elderly black vote goes along with it. He never made the point that Joe Biden, when he is going out there saying he was fighting for civil rights, Joe Biden got caught lying for that in the 80s, where Joe Biden had to drop out of a campaign for plagiarism and also lying about his education experience. Now, that's opposition research. And the moment that Biden lies about Social Security, it becomes fair game to say this guy's a liar. He also never really challenged the thing on electability, meaning, Hillary Clinton lost, Al Gore lost, John Kerry lost. Joe Biden is just one of the same type of people that lost. Those are never arguments that Sanders could articulate, even though his campaign fully understood it, they just wouldn't do it. And so it's like even if Sanders didn't suspend his campaign, he was running his campaign basically with 2 arms behind his back. It's a knife fight, and he comes there, with a book. And doesn't at any point realize that the inability to make that contrast basically is working within the lines where you lose.
Right.
At no point did his numbers with the African-American vote didn't go up until it started to look like Joe Biden's electability was falling, which was in like Ohio, New Hampshire, and so forth. The moment that Joe Biden won South Carolina, electability went straight back up. His polling went straight down with the African-American community because that was never a fight. He never articulated a fight in that realm that Joe Biden is lying about this very specific issue that is intrinsic from a sacred standpoint to African Americans. He just let him coast on it. It's aggravating.
You know what? It's like, you're right. That's tied in with electability, because I'm hearing some from my older African American supporters who say, you guys are insulting us by thinking that we don't know Bernie Sanders is the better candidate on racial justice. That's not the problem.
That's not the issue.
We are going to vote for someone who we think can win.
Yes.
And he's not going to attack Joe Biden. Now, this is Bernie's fatal flaw. He ultimately wanted to be liked. even though he's been railing against the establishment for 50 years, ultimately, and I discussed this, I did a 90-minute interview with Branko Marcetic, who wrote a book called Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden. And we went through Joe Biden's entire 50-year record. That's why it was 90 minutes. But one of the things that he talked about in his book was Joe Biden started out in the early 70s, and he was progressive for like a couple of years. By 1978, he was already taking his Republican opponent's platform and running more conservatively. But in the beginning, you know, he was a product of his times, like Richard Nixon would be considered a moderate Democrat today. But Joe Biden switched because he got into the Senate, and the word that, you know, Branko used in his book was clubbiness, because it's like this club, and Bernie was never part of it. So the pre-1991 Bernie was very radical. Like if you listen to Bernie in the 70s and the 80s, he was saying things about the two-party system, about the establishment, about foreign policy, about nationalizing industries, things that are much more radical domestically and foreign policy-wise than he's saying now. What happened? He got into this body, and he was always an outsider. He tried to, you know, not join the Democratic Party. He tried to make these lone, courageous votes that history, you know, showed he was the only one that was right on them.
Yeah.
But what happened was ultimately, and I noticed this happen in 2016, he endorsed Hillary, I believe, because they made a deal that if he conceded to Hillary before the convention and didn't have a contested convention like he was telling us delegates he would, you know, he didn't put forward the 25 minority platform planks on the floor of the convention, which is why I organized the TPP protest that you saw with all the signs and us chanting over Elijah Cummings. He didn't have a floor fight for the rules because he gave in with that Unity Reform Commission. And the whole thing was just this one big, you know, kumbaya coronation if it weren't for us delegates who were protesting,
right,
which we're going to discuss at the end, because basically what his campaign did, this is the one I talk about at the end, is purged all the activists from being delegates this time because they didn't want that to happen again.
Wow.
But yeah. Wow. But going back to 2016, so, you know, they told him that he wanted to be the head of the HELP committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. And I know this because I heard him say that on C-SPAN. Now, he was not in line to be the head of that. That was Patty Murray's committee. So I think they promised him the HELP committee. And what ended up happening was they gave it to Patty Murray, and they gave him this bullshit director of outreach position.
Right.
Remember when he was going around with Tom Perez, you know, trying to convince everyone that the Democratic Party
Democrat, right.
Yeah. So I kind of knew back then, you know, Bernie really has this fatal flaw, which is that he's been co-opted by the institution, the very establishment that he's reviled for 30 years, because he's worked in it, and he feels like, I don't know why he thinks he can get anything done there. The Congress is totally bought out, and of the two chambers, I think the Senate is the most useless. So he thinks that he can get stuff done. And the biggest thing for me is, you know, he always said he was the organizer in chief. And what I've realized about Bernie is that what he organizes is rallies and talk shows. I call his town halls talk shows because he gets together these experts, whether it's Medicare for all or the thing that he did with the Postal Service last week. He gets together these experts and he hosts these discussions, but they never go anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, he's not really an organizer in the sense that he organizes people to do things. John Nichols posted an article in The Nation today, an interview with Bernie that was done on May Day, in which Bernie shows that he totally understands the need for strikes, right? Bernie could have, instead of endorsing Joe Biden for zero concessions, he could have quit the Senate. Well, first he should have voted no on those corporate bailouts. He voted for every single one of them, and AOC was the only one who voted no, as it turns out.
Yeah.
Could have voted no on those corporate bailouts, quit the Senate, stayed in the presidential race, and used his great organization to facilitate rent strikes and general strikes. because we're in a pandemic right now. This is a once in a century situation we haven't seen in 100 years, where we're going to have people are at home, ready to be organized, and we're going to have 30% unemployment. And what we have now is we have Amazon workers, we have Instacart drivers, we have, people who are not in unions organizing to save their lives. Basically, they are ordinary people who realize if they don't do something, they're going to die.
Yeah.
And this is a moment where you could create class consciousness in the working class and say, okay, let's organize. And when I had Christian Smalls from Amazon, who organized that strike and got fired, I said to him, don't you feel great? Like you have purpose, you have meaning, you're doing this? And he goes, yeah, my life has totally changed. I will never go back. We have taken him from an ordinary citizen into an organizer. And that's what we could do. Bernie Sanders had a national organization with text teams, call teams, email teams, everything. He could have organized this stuff. How can he talk to John Nichols about Eugene Debs and not recognize that Eugene Debs was a real organizer? If Bernie wanted to make these changes, he could have done it. It was within his grasp. But no, he wants to stay in that Senate and be liked by my friend Joe Biden. He's only human, apparently.
Yes, he's only human, but I think that just makes it that much more aggravating, honestly. I mean, look, Sanders he has all the capacity in the world to use that large infrastructure of all of those people where he has a certain ideological alignment all throughout the United States. Let's say there are 20 million people, how many ever they are. And there's a large number of those people that, even though they won't vote for him, agree with him. Like they would say, yes, I prefer Medicare for all. And then he'd lose by 30 points in South Carolina. And it's like, what? How does that work? It's because the argument that these guys were going with was, who do we think we can sell to the public outside in the general election? And media, and from their context of what a typical Democrat is, they miss the point that that typical Democrat tends to lose. And so Sanders has the win in regards to ideology. Now, the problem becomes, how do you materialize that into anything real where you can get it moving, especially when people aren't voting on that? I agree with you in the sense that he has the capability with all of those people that agree with him ideologically, even if they're not voting for him, and those people who absolutely agree with him, who will come to those stadiums and everything else, to mobilize those people in ways that go beyond just vote for me or not vote for me. Totally agree with you. But the catch becomes, he would never do that, because for the exact same reason that he would never go after Biden for Social Security, for the same reason he would never go after Biden for the cognitive glitches, or even if this was happening in Tara Reid stuff 3 months ago, he probably would never even bring this up. Like, it's the same reason. Basically, Sanders doesn't want to be Ralph Nader. And so any attack that he delivers, he doesn't necessarily want it to pierce Joe Biden in any particular way where he could get blamed for that particular person losing. Missing the point, they're going to blame him anyway, just like they blamed him back then. But he runs this race with a prevalent fear that something he is going to do is going to somehow hurt the other candidate, missing the point that your job is to hurt the other candidate. If the other candidate is so weak that the person can be hurt by something that's in the primary, then you don't want that person getting out to the general where they can be taken down by the same thing. But that's not the logic Sanders works with.
Kind of makes you wonder if he really wanted to win.
Yes, it does. Honestly, it does.
I mean, these task forces, this platform, it's like the other time I'm screaming at my TV is where they canceling, first of all, they were going to take away the California delegates, that weren't the direct delegates, the Pleos and the at-large. They were going to take that away from him. I think he's working with Joe Biden to keep those.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Then they were, Cuomo cancels the thing in New York, and everybody's, this is horrible. He suspended his campaign, and according to the rules, we can do this. And so I'm like, well, Bernie, I guess you shouldn't have suspended
your campaign. Right.
Those delegates were so important to you. I guess you shouldn't have suspended your campaign. And then people are fundraising like Citizen. Andrew fucking Yang sues New York,
yes,
right?
He does.
Bernie doesn't sue him. Andrew Yang sues him. And then some, and Bernie leaves some delegate of his to do the lawsuit. And this poor delegate is setting up a GoFundMe when Bernie Sanders has all the money in the world, which is another thing that bothers me. People gave their last dimes to him.
Yes, they did.
So I gave less than $100 this time, even though I could make the maximum contribution to that man. But I just no, I am so done with electoral politics. And, me, I'm an activist. I organize on the issues. I feel like issue campaigns on the local level is where we can have the most effect. But, I just kind of felt invested in Bernie because of how hard I worked for him 4 years ago. But to just see him fold like this for
It's
zero.
painful. It is painful. I think I've given more than $100 to Sanders. And I was invested in him in 2016 and 2020. In 2016, I felt like they cheated him. They robbed him. And then in 2020, as he ran his race, I kept thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. You can't run a race like this. I mean, Sanders' weakness is his inability to create contrast and go after his opponent. You don't have to be mean. You don't have to be vicious or nasty. But you are forced, just based by the rules of the game space and all the incentives that are built into it, to go after your opponent if you're an insurgent candidate and you're trying to win. It's just what Obama did when he was going after Hillary Clinton and Obama was considered the insurgent candidate. It's just part and parcel to the rules. Also, if you tell me, if you look me in the face and say, I am pushing for a political revolution, and I take you at your word that you indeed want a political revolution, there are some things in my head that go along corresponding logically to a political revolution. And some of that is there really a such thing as a bloodless revolution? I don't think so. And I mean that in a figurative sense. You have to be willing to do what you need to do to put a knife in your opponent in order to be able to get over the finish line. Because there are some times where you're not going to be able to win with just a good speech. And that part was entirely off the table when Sanders ran the campaign. I have to be honest. I started to ask myself, was he running a campaign at all? Meaning, was this all for show? Was this all for this thing of sheepdogging people at the end to the Democratic Party, and so there wasn't that hard of a push on it? And the reason why he didn't invest a bunch of money into the person doing the delegates, because that he knows what I know is that it doesn't mean anything. It's the moment that you pull out of the race, whether you suspend your campaign or not. If Sanders would lose New York or whatever, the delegates that he would get from that state, so what? It's only going to be a minority position. He's fighting over platform issues when the platform doesn't matter, and blowing this up to be something when in the reality of it, I am at a loss for what you gain out of this. Am I wrong?
What really bothers me is how many progressives are defending this. I mean, you look at Nomiki Konst, and granted, she was on the platform committee. Mm-hmm. I think she might have been on the rules committee too. And, she's saying, because somebody pointed out, as I pointed out, that what's the point of, influencing the platform if you're not even going to bring your minority reports to the floor of the convention? Again, the whole reason I organized the TPP protest was one of those reports was Jim Hightower's amendment that Obama should not be pushing the TPP during the lame duck session.
That's right.
And we organized more at that convention. We had people that were organizing a petition. We even had a cocktail party with Hillary delegates the night before this convention to get them to sign this pledge. It was going to be a joint pledge between Bernie and Hillary delegates that Obama should not push the TPP during the lame duck session. I mean, we knew that this would be death for the Democrats. And that is exactly who sat out the election. Those Rust Belt people who, saw that only Bernie and only Trump were against the TPP, that cost them their high-paying factory jobs, and now we have all these diseases of despair, with these people that just are lost. They're forgotten people. And I'm having this guy on my show, just sent him an email. I think his name is Barry E. Levine, or Brian E. something like that, Bruce E. Levine. And he wrote this article in Counterpunch about this. And these are the people that Trump is going to get, okay? Because they are the people he got the first time. And his article that I want to discuss on my show is how, there's no way that Biden is going to be able to convince these people that he's going to be there for them with his record. But at least the Democratic Party can show that Trump has not done all the things that he promised to do.
Right.
His idea, and he is a clinical psychologist, this guy. And he wrote a book about anti-authoritarianism and the kind of people that don't like to follow rules, which includes me. So I'm very interested to have this conversation with him because I think he's putting forth a strategy that, David Plouffe and David Axelrod can write as many articles as they want. in
New York Times. I saw that article
about how Biden has to go on, TikTok and Instagram. Can you imagine that? He can't even read from his teleprompter.
I saw that.
It's written out for him, and he can't even read it. I mean,
that was their plea for Biden. It was like, dude, you're going to lose this race. You got to do something different. You can't be in your basement.
I mean, what do you think of this? I mean, how do you think? Look, Bernie. Let me just make one more point about the activist delegates. Okay, so I didn't do much organizing for Bernie. I did, though, decide that I was going to go to Nevada and live stream a caucus. And in order to know what the caucus was about, I took the training to be a precinct chair, because everybody was saying, oh, let's go and be an observer. But I said, the observers can't do anything. If they observe something going wrong, they don't have any power. But the precinct chair runs the caucus. Yeah. And they were looking for people from California, because we did this in 2016. They liked the job that we did. So I had a meeting in my house with Christine Kramer, who is a Bernie delegate from Nevada, also a political consultant. And she was on the platform committee. She was appointed by the Bernie team to be on the platform committee, or by her state of Nevada. And Joe Sacco, who is a Bernie delegate as well from Nevada. So we had a meeting with, I encouraged about 10 people from LA to become precinct chairs. They took the training online. Then we met at my house and we talked about, okay, that's what the Nevada Democratic Party wants to tell you, but what do we really need to know from the Bernie people in Nevada? So they were here in LA the week before the caucus. We had a little training, and then we did this live stream. And at the training, Jeremy White, who ran one of the three major LA Bernie groups, there was my group, LA for Bernie, his group with Michelle Manos, Bernie's volunteer office that moved into the coffee shop. Remember Bernie's coffee shop?
Yeah.
And then Carlos Marroquin's, the Bernie Sanders Brigade. So here we are, the three biggest leaders of the Bernie organization, volunteer organization in 2016. And Carlos and Michelle and Jeremy to some extent, worked their ass off for the Bernie campaign last summer, doing everything that this staff that was hired, establishment staff, by the way. I never wrote about this publicly, but the person, that they hired for Los Angeles wasn't even a Bernie supporter. He had posted on his Facebook page, 1 month before, a photo of him with his arm around Julian Castro and the hashtag Castro 2020. And this is this Latino labor guy who couldn't even win his own race for county committee. Okay? This is who they put in charge of LA, the biggest city, or the second largest city in the country, in the number one state that Bernie needed to win. And so they hired all these unqualified people who weren't even Berners. And then they were going to hire field organizers in the fall. So Carlos and Michelle, they worked their ass off doing everything that these unqualified people told them to do. And then they didn't even get hired.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's horrible. That's horrible.
Not only did they not get hired, they got blacklisted by the campaign, as did I, by the way.
And How did you get blacklisted from the campaign?
Blacklisted. They told these field organizers, several of whom were our friends, who were actual activists and organizers, Bernie people we've known and are friends with for 4 years. They told those people not to talk to us. That is how much the Bernie campaign disdained the grassroots. I could write a book on this. I haven't gone public about this before. I mean, I've been holding stuff in since 2016 because I didn't want to hurt the campaign.
Wow.
But Jeremy said to me at that meeting that he had applied to be a Bernie delegate and he was rejected. So we talked about this in this live stream that I did, about how they were going to be, for the first time, they were inviting people to apply. In 2016, anybody could run.
Yeah.
We had 115 candidates in my congressional district. I won the number one woman spot. I was the only one who had more than 50% of the vote in the room, because I've been an activist on the issue. So it wasn't just my Bernie people who knew me from my Bernie work. It was all the other work that I did on fracking and the TPP and net neutrality and just having lived here in this district for 30 years, right? So this time, though, they were going to invite people. So he had said that he had submitted an application and was rejected. And then I found out that very day that, that wasn't true. He never got anything back. He was just like assuming that he'd be rejected.
I see.
So I pulled the live stream because I didn't want to, again, hurt the Bernie campaign by putting out speculation that may not even be true. But guess what? Last week, turns out on Facebook, all my friends are posting how they got rejected for being a delegate, for Bernie. These are people who worked their asses off for this campaign. And what we figured out, the common theme was that these people are activists. And Joe Sacco, who was that Bernie delegate from Nevada, who I told you about, was in my house. He was in the live stream.
Yeah.
He and I both talked to Jeff Weaver at the victory party in Las Vegas.
Interesting.
I didn't ask Bernie this question, but Joe did. He said, who is going to be delegate? What is your criteria? Because you're now inviting people for choosing who these delegates are going to be. And he said, people who are going to go along with the campaign.
No activists. No rowdy activists. They don't
want anybody booing. They don't want anybody organizing protests. They don't want anyone not voting for Biden. They want people to go along.
Much. That's it.
What do you think of that?
That's it. They want people to go along and vote for, like at the end of that process, they want to be able to say, we're going to vote for Biden. And like, again, therein lies the problem. Like if your name is Sanders and you really are saying, I'm calling for a political revolution, then you're not running in a race where you are not trying to hurt your opponent. You are trying to hurt your opponent. You're tying your opponent to everything that you consider to be wrong in the Democratic and Republican Party, calling these parties two wings of the same bird. That is not a conversation that people are going to necessarily like you over. However, that is the conversation that you need to have. And even getting to the point of using your mass of voters as your backing. Meaning your leverage, or Sanders' leverage in the political space, comes in his ability to bring people into the political fold, but also put pressure on that political system in order to get concessions from it. If you had anybody that would make the negotiations, kind of like a union and a business, where the corporation has more power than the union in that situation, but the union makes negotiations with the corporation in order to come to some agreement on levels to which they can exist and interact. In our case, it's strange. The left loves unions, but hate the notion of having some kind of negotiation. So say for the moment that the left made the point of, yes, we're not voting for X unless we get Medicare for all and something else. They will bellyache, they will boo-hoo, but at the end of the day, they either lose or win to try to get your support, meaning either to give the concessions and get the support or lose. The left doesn't look at politics that way. I mean, even Sanders doesn't look at it that way. AOC doesn't look at it that way. Jayapal doesn't look at it that way. And you ask the very basic point, where's your standard? Like, at what level does it take for you to say, okay, I can't vote for that? And if that level doesn't exist, then there's no such thing as accountability, and you're willing to accept anything. And that's kind of how I feel with what's going on right now with Joe Biden and the Tara Reade stuff. All of these Democrats have lined up with, I believe Biden. And just 2 years ago, all of them were, I believe Ford. And whatever they realize, whatever they think, this may not hurt Biden with Democrats proper. But independents and people who may lean Democrat, this makes it that much harder and onerous to vote for Biden, which means it's going to lower the vote total coming in November, making it that much harder for Biden to get elected. I think this story is going to stick with him, and I think it's going to have like a stink on him that is not necessarily going to wash off. All of Trump's accusers have already made their cases known. So this is not like, hey, Trump got it too. Yeah, that may be true, but at the end of the day, this person is out right now, and all of you guys are pretending she doesn't exist. So how do you think this is going to affect him going forward? Is this something that really is just going to die out? In which case, by the time people do the election, it's going to be something where Tara Reade is just a footnote. Unfortunately, I mean, I say that horribly, but Tom Perez is like, we're not going to have any investigations. Every Democrat is trying to push it under the rug and don't want to talk about it. So is this something that doesn't affect Biden, or is this something that does affect him in this kind of implicit way of people being able to get over a hump to vote for a particular candidate?
Well, I don't think it's going to affect him because, like you said, the mainstream media, who I think we both call the stenographers for the corporate state.
Pretty much, yes.
The mainstream media is giving him cover on this because they're amplifying, it's just one big club and we're not in it, right? I mean, New York Times does an interview, the AP does an interview, and then they come to these sort of selective conclusions, and then Joy Reid will amplify it. And then Joy Reid yesterday, I would just want to kill her. I swear to God. I hope Facebook doesn't think of this as a threat and kill my channel altogether. But I'm saying that figuratively, Facebook. She makes me crazy because she's now saying that this is all orchestrated by Bernie Sanders.
Yes, yes, she did.
She's like, Bernie Sanders is like, oh my God, this guy,
She's like, just so happened this woman is a Bernie voter. And it's like, what the hell does that have to do with the presidency in China? Look, if somebody raped me, I wouldn't vote for him either. So,
they're putting out all the timing, they're blaming the victim.
Yeah.
Goddamn, was it Patricia Arquette? It wasn't Alyssa Milano, but it was somebody of that ilk. Oh no! I can't remember.
Lisa Bloom came out with a post that is I was fascinated by. She was being honest. She says, "Tara, I believe you. I honestly believe you. However, Donald Trump is president, and we need to get him out of office. So, despite believing you, I need to vote for Joe Biden. I'm sorry."
Right. Well, that is it. That is at least honest.
That is at least honest. It's sad, pathetic, shameful, but honest.
But this person that I'm speaking about, it's Deborah Messing.
Oh, her. Oh, Lord. Will and Grace.
She tweets out yesterday this article about Tara Reid being arrested for shoplifting, or I don't know. It wasn't, maybe not shoplifting, but it was some thing that she had done in her past.
That had nothing to do with the assault. Yeah.
This is what's called rape culture, okay? Yeah. Rape culture is where you blame the victim or you try to bring up something in the person's history to discredit them. And this is a fucking feminist doing this.
Yes, it is.
This is a faux feminist. They're all faux feminists because feminism from my decade, the feminism that I learned in the 70s was about collective liberation. If one of us isn't free, none of us is free. And for them, this is how neoliberalism, and I did a whole show on this with Gail Dines, who's a radical anti-porn feminist, as am I, she says that for decades of neoliberalism has affected third wave feminine, and I've discussed this on your show before.
Yeah. I'm just laughing. The idea is that I was laughing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't even want to discuss this, but I just want to say the point is that it has affected feminism in that third wave feminism is all about leaning in, like Sheryl Sandberg, leaning in, breaking the glass ceiling. As long as I get to be CEO, fuck the rest of you. Yeah. And that was Hillary. As long as I get to be president. That's her slogan. I'm with her. It was like some Mean Girls clique in middle school. I'm with her. It wasn't about, Bernie's, which was a future to believe in, or this time, not me, us. Yeah. So no, I feel like I've seen this movie before. This is Monica Lewinsky all over again. They threw Monica Lewinsky, these very same feminist groups and so-called progressive elected officials threw Monica Lewinsky under the bus because Bill Clinton was good on choice. And that's exactly the same thing they're doing because, like you said, they want to get rid of Trump.
Yep.
But Bernie, back to this political revolution thing. It's not a revolution, it's reform. See, when you want to be in an institution like the Senate that never gets anything done, I'm constantly asking people who, when they say to me, oh, he wants to stay in the Senate and get stuff done. I'm saying, point to one piece of progressive legislation that originated in the Senate in the last 4 decades. I'll wait, Nobody can think of anything. So here's what happened today. And Pramila Jayapal is going to be on my show, and I like her. And
interesting. That should be a good interview.
Yeah, I'm not going to go after her like the way people are going after her on Twitter, because I think that she is doing what she has to do to be an effective elected official.
Yes.
And the same thing with AOC. If you read yesterday's article about AOC in the New York Times, her district has more coronavirus cases than any district.
Yes.
She is working her ass off. She is providing mutual aid. And she was talking about how lonely it is to take these stands, these principal stands. And she felt kind of betrayed because she got the impression that other people were going to support her in not voting for the corporate bailout number 4.
Yes.
Turns out she was the only one who did. And there's no percentage in that, as we could see from Bernie. Now, here's where I say Bernie's only human, because for 30 years, he was laboring in obscurity, casting these lone votes that nobody wrote about, speaking to an empty chamber but being captured on C-SPAN. Finally he got some notoriety. Finally he got some attention, and he's gonna use it, So he uses his platform to do, as I say, talk shows. But they're nothing more than talk shows, because look, here's the thing. I wrote an article about the Postal Accountability Act of 2006, and how that was the start of the privatization of the Postal Service, that they have to fund employee health benefits 75 years into the future. And no other government agency has to do that.
Yeah.
It turns out, Bernie's been trying to get rid of this mandate all this time. But guess what? He was one of the co-sponsors of that bill. So apparently, Republicans slipped this in at the end, but still he signed it. And this goes to show that they don't read the bills they vote for. So he voted for this thing that had this awful mandate in it. And then to his credit, he tried to get it repealed. It didn't work. So now he's saying we have to save the Postal Service. We have to say Donald Trump refuses to let, the Postal Service thing be in there. The Democrats, okay, so what do? He has a talk show, as I call it. It's a town hall, a forum, whatever, but it's nothing more than a talk show because they're just talking. And he says he's got the 3 postal workers union leaders there, and they're talking about this act, and they're talking about what's happening and why we have to save the Postal Service. And what is the upshot? I posted that this was happening, and I said, betcha in 1 hour, nobody's going to mention that they need to go on strike. And sure enough, they never mentioned that. The upshot was write your congressman, call your congressman. Now, here you have a senator, Bernie Sanders, who doesn't need to be called because he knows about this issue. And yet he fucking votes for this. So it's like you said, if they really cared about doing anything for the people, they would not keep voting for these things for crumbs. What did they get in the last bailout? They got some testing.
Yes.
They didn't get saving the post office. They didn't get voting by mail. They didn't get, rent freezes. They didn't get anything that progressives wanted. And they all fucking voted for it.
All of them. Every last one of them. With the exception of AOC for the last bill. And look, I gave her credit for that. I mean, I made a point that all the pressure in the world is applied to people when the public is in dire straits and they say, all right, I'm going to throw you pennies. And the moment that you say, well, look, we're not going to accept those pennies, they then run an attack ad saying we're trying to help the public and this particular person is not assisting us in helping the public. When really what they're fighting for is pennies. The Democratic Party got conned in the fighting for just putting money in hospitals and vaccines. And it's like, but those are things that a rational society would do. Why are you fighting for that as opposed to fighting for the other items in addition to that? But they didn't want to have that fight. Nancy Pelosi didn't want to have that fight. My point of view is that I think AOC understands what's going on inappropriately or wrong. I think the reality of it is that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are basically owned by the same group of owners, this owner class, this corporate class. And in doing so, that class wants those people back to work every bit as much as fervently as the Republican Party does. With the difference being the Republican Party is running the ball on it, with the Democratic Party just sitting mute, not necessarily getting involved, ensuring that people have paid for their general welfare, making sure the rent was on strike or hiatus. Those things weren't part of Democrats' proposals or even counter proposals to whatever the Republicans was doing. This is kind of my point. AOC is functioning like she has a philosophical responsibility to actually deal with her public, especially since her particular area is being hit so hard. But I don't think Democrats think that. I think the establishment Democrats are in line with Republicans of we need to get this economy back going. We need to get this economy back to work. What the difference is, the Democrats just do it by hands up. I really think that. I mean, because otherwise, I don't know how you explain Democrats' behavior. I mean, is it weakness and worthlessness in regards to being able to get things done? Or do they really just look at it as, look, people need to get back to work. If the Republicans are going to run with it, they'll take the hit on it. We'll just stand by and not say anything.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that progressives are outnumbered. And I really do want to talk to her about this because, there's so many millionaires in Congress. And they start to lose touch with the very people that they're supposed to be representing.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like me. I always grew up very comfortable, and I didn't really know any people who were like minimum wage workers or blue collar workers, members of unions until Occupy. Yeah. Okay. And that was when I was in my 50s. So I've always been liberal, and I do say that there's a difference between liberal and progressive. I've probably been more progressive than liberal. But I never really had the face-to-face interactions. And this is the problem with some of these liberals too, especially friends of mine who I'm writing to on Facebook who are saying, oh, we hate Biden, he's horrible, but we have to vote for him because Trump, and it's like Trump derangement syndrome. And I keep saying, no, Trump is the symptom. The disease is neoliberal capitalism.
Yes.
And if we keep, and she even used this one particular woman who's fighting with me on this, big Bernie supporter, loves him, but no, Trump, is like, saying, oh, he's a cancer. And I'm like, no, he's like not the cancer. He is the symptom. And if voting for Biden is like chemotherapy, it just extends the cancer. And you're still living with this miserable disease, but you're just living longer with it. You have to cure the cancer. And to cure the cancer, you have to get rid of neoliberal capitalism, which is basically the idea that the private sector can do everything better, faster, cheaper, quicker than the public sector. So the thing is that, Democrats, as we know, during Bill Clinton with the Democratic Leadership Committee, decided that the place they used to get their money, unions, were losing power, were losing members. Where do they go? Like Willie Sutton, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is.
Where the cash is.
They went to Wall Street. So they're so dependent on this money. And I talked about this in my show the other day with Chuck Collins, who is like a 1%er who gave up his $500,000 inheritance from his great-grandfather, Oscar Mayer. He gave that up when he was 26 years old, and he became a community organizer, and now he has a Center Institute for Policy Studies, and they study inequality and the wealthiest families and why they do that. And so what happens is they're just out of touch. So are these Congress people, and they need to raise money to get reelected. I learned this in college. Yeah. Congress, they don't exist to represent their constituency. They exist to get reelected. And how do you get reelected? With money. So we were talking about this the other day because he was talking about all these reforms that we need to do. We need to have a wealth tax. We need to have corporate, workers on corporate boards. We need to get rid of the carried loophole interest thing, all this stuff that you would do through legislation. But why don't we do that? Because the people that would be affected by that are the same people that donate to the Democrats as donate to the Republicans. Look at Nancy Pelosi. She's sitting there during the coronavirus, opening up her freezer and showing it's filled with Jenny's ice cream. I know Jenny's ice cream. It costs $12 a pint. She doesn't even eat normal people's ice cream. She eats designer ice cream. And she doesn't even realize how most people are worried about, whether they can pay their rent this month.
Yep, that's right.
And this is the answer to your question, why they don't do it, because they're disconnected with the people. They personally do not know people, 40% of Americans who do not have $400 in the bank to pay for an unexpected expense. They don't know anybody like that. When you know people and you work with people, how it's changed my life, then you realize what's at stake here.
The media doesn't get it either. Like, they don't get it either. Like, these guys, all of these people are 1%ers and above 1%ers. Chuck Todd has, $10 million in the bank. Rachel Maddow, $10 million in the bank. They're so detached. For example, I was watching a media report today where the person was wringing her hands about, all of these people are going to go back to work, and all of these people are going to get sick when they go back to work. And these lawmakers are pushing people back to work. And they never hit the basic contradiction in the statement that if your government is not going to provide for the general welfare, then how are those people going to make it from A to B? Meaning, if you say, which is true, half of the country doesn't have $500 in the bank for an emergency, half of the country works paycheck to paycheck. And if that's true, and you've had 30 million people, even more when the next job report comes out, that lost their jobs, how are those people going to pay for themselves? Especially when the government is like, okay, here's $1,200, and that doesn't even pay for rent for most people. It's like, so unless you're really also talking about some kind of UBI, some kind of ignoring of the rent or rent strike, or some kind of thing that deals with the other bills that people have in contrast to, their major way of living or their ability to live, then you can't honestly have that conversation and have that conversation make sense. Because if people are desperate, those people are going to want to go back to work, regardless of the medical hazard. That's just those people being compelled by their vulnerabilities and their needs. Whereas media doesn't quite get the point that the reason that some of these people are trying to go back to work is because they don't have any money. They're not working. And it's like government is like, okay, we're only going to get $1,200. knowing full well that that $1,200 is not going to be enough in order to satisfy those people's needs, and that those people are going to be agitating to get back to work in order to have something to eat. Media doesn't get it. They don't live in that life. And like you said, the politicians are so out of touch on that stuff that it's not their world. Like, my argument is always, the 1% makes all the sense in the world from the standpoint of them taking behaviors that are in their best interest of the 1%. The working class takes behaviors that is also in the interest of the 1%, which doesn't make sense if you're looking at this from a class-based way. But you can't be mad at Chuck Todd, who's made $10 million, who has his health care, who has his car insurance, who has his education paid for, whose kids will have their education paid for. You can't get mad at Chuck Todd when Chuck Todd doesn't care about you not having health care, or doesn't care about you not getting an education from school or that type of stuff, because Chuck Todd has all that stuff already covered. It's like your entire media space and your entire political space is basically full of people who are millionaires who have all of those things covered. So when Sanders comes out with this stuff, that's not their issues. Like, I think we need to fully understand that the narratives that we get and the stories that we get are propagated by human beings who have certain points of view of the world that can be organized around their class interests. That's just our media. And until people get around that and realize that's just their point of view, and that point of view is governed by economic interests, then it's hard to get people over the hump of realizing that the world can be a different place.
Yeah, and really, that's why they want to get them back to work. That's why they want to provide them, get the homeless into hotel rooms, because they can now be infected, right?
Yes, that's right.
All of a sudden, these cities are, commandeering hotel rooms and putting the homeless into them. Why weren't they doing that before? And Bernie Sanders, okay, so this is the other thing that I'm screaming at my TV about. He says in his live stream, before the Postal Service live stream, this was the Medicare for All live stream, he tells people, now is not the time to get Medicare for all. We're going to get Medicare to cover people's treatments, because right now they're just talking about providing free testing, but we think it should be covering their treatment.
Yeah, it should be.
No, Bernie, now is exactly the time to get Medicare for all, because we have them over a barrel. Now is exactly the time to get a Green New Deal, because we can see, looking at the picture behind me, what Los Angeles looks like when there's no traffic, because there's no smog.
You can see the sky back there.
Right? I mean, this is unbelievable. And he has what I call his vision is limited. His imagination, his vision is limited about what we can achieve in this unprecedented moment that we haven't had in 100 years. Yeah. He is not seeing this pandemic, even though, you have to go read this interview with John Nichols and Bernie on May Day, because it seems like he gets it. And yet there's something that is not clicking for him to make the next step, to say, oh, yes. He writes, oh, I tweeted about that, and he tweeted about some rent strike and some general strike. He tweeted about it. He doesn't understand that he is uniquely in a position to organize this, to change the world, essentially, if he could see what he could do with his power. Instead, he endorses Biden, sits there with him, and says, Joe understands that climate change is an existential threat. Joe understands that health care is a right, not a privilege. He did this with Clinton. I never forget. I was screaming at my TV when he did this with Clinton, 4 years ago in New Hampshire, when he did that first rally with her. And I'm just like, no, she doesn't understand. Joe doesn't understand, because they're paid not to understand that. And so are Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. So what are we going to do? I mean, the only thing, and then it's about organizing ourselves. We are the ones we have been waiting for. It's always been us. It's really hard to do this when you're all separated. The right wing is very authoritarian. They can do it because they tell everybody what to do. You can't tell people what to do on the left, because everybody is a free thinker, and we're all democratic with the D. Only mad at him, even though I understand it, even though I can explain it, I just still feel.
Like I said, my feelings for Sanders are extremely complicated. It's part of me appreciates, I don't want to take anything away from him bringing this stuff into the limelight. But by the same token, missed opportunity, like nobody business, and that burns. Like that's the part I think that burns the most. Lauren, is there anything else that you want to say before we close today? Something that we might have missed, something why we might not have gone over that you wanted to discuss before I close?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
You have
Well,
to go?
yeah, I have not an interview, but I have a thing at 5 o'clock here. But I agree with you on the Sanders stuff, and I think I don't want to say anger, but maybe there is a bit of anger there, and feelings of betrayal and all of this other stuff. It just feels like a missed opportunity, and it feels like a missed opportunity when the world was at stake. Meaning, you told me about existential crisis. You told me about, people living on the street and people not having health care. Those are horrible situations. A human being without somewhere to live is a horrible crisis, I would argue. And yet, despite all of that pain and misery that you've somehow quantified and that you've, put on your shoulders and showing this is what America looks like and this is what we need to change, there was still this issue of, yeah, but Joe Biden's my buddy. And so despite all of this pain and anguish, I can't go beyond that point. Or I just don't want to do anything that will make me look like Ralph Nader and they will blame me for it. Or I don't have the imagination to do this. I mean, I don't know. It's just aggravating to me. That's all. And so
Yeah.
I'm
I
going
think
to leave it to you for the last word.
Yeah, well, I think it's exasperating. I think that's the word
That's
that
it.
I think that's the emotion that I feel more than anger. I just
That's
feel
it.
exasperation. And I want to mention something about Ralph Nader
Go for it.
because I was a great student of Bernie Sanders. When I was running LA for Bernie, I used to watch everything that he ever did. And I remember a press conference that he did when he had just gotten elected to Congress in 1990, or maybe it was 91 when he was taking office, right? So he was talking about how he was going to be a different kind of congressperson and the people that he would bring in to advise him. And one of them was Ralph Nader.
Interesting.
And I subsequently found out that he hasn't talked to Ralph Nader since 2000 because he blames Nader for Al Gore's loss.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Which is so unfair because something like 46,000 Democrats voted for Nader, but apparently 250,000 voted for George Bush. So why isn't he blaming the Democrats who voted for the Republican rather than the Democrats who voted for Nader? And also, Al Gore actually did win Florida.
Yeah.
He asked for the wrong kind of recount. But when they did the recount, they found out that he, won Florida. And of course, the Supreme Court stole that election. So why Bernie blames Ralph Nader is beyond me, but he hasn't spoken to him since 2000. And you're absolutely right. This is why he didn't want to run as an independent. I asked him, I went up to Richmond, California in 2014 to personally ask him. I already had my Bernie Sanders 2016 t-shirt on. I had bought it from like some site.
Yeah.
And I went up there. He was doing a fundraiser for the Richmond Progressive Alliance. I went up there to ask him to run as an independent and also, that way he could lead a movement and not just a campaign. And he said, I've heard that before. I will consider it. So when he decided to run as a Democrat, I understood why. He wanted to get into the debates and he wanted to be attention of the media.
Right.
But they only had 6 debates. They were scheduled on Saturday, opposite football games. The media either didn't cover him or they covered him badly. So I felt like, okay, I gave him that pass in 2016. But in 2020, he still could have run as an independent. He needs to understand that the plurality of American voters are independent.
Right.
44%, and he could have run as an independent because, again, the Democrats screwed him over this time. So it's like Groucho Marx. I wouldn't join a country club that would have me as a member. It's like there's this sort of like Stockholm syndrome or something that he keeps going back to the same well where he keeps getting poisoned. And this time I just feel like, it was within his grasp. I mean, This coronavirus made it so clear that his policies are what is needed in this time.
So wait, are you certain that he blamed Ralph Nader for Al Gore losing?
Yes, I've heard this from people who know him and who've talked to him about this.
Oh, wow.
And he hasn't spoken to Ralph Nader since then. And so what you said is absolutely right. He didn't want to be the the Nader. And he also didn't want to give the election over to Trump.
Yeah.
Now, this time, I think if he had, done what I said and used his network to provide mutual aid, not campaigning during a coronavirus, but to be out there providing mutual aid and then to organize rent strikes and general strikes, he could have walked away with this election. He could have walked away with it. Instead, I don't know. I keep going back and forth depending on the day as to who I think is going to win. Sometimes I think if the economy tanks, Trump cannot win no matter what, because like Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. If 30% of people are unemployed, how can Trump win? But if Biden is just so incoherent and terrible, and people don't come out to vote for him, I mean, I don't know. Who do you think is going to win?
I think Trump wins. I think Trump wins. Initially, I thought, well, it's a toss-up because the COVID-19 virus, if a lot of people die, if millions of people die, or even if 200,000 people die, and Trump gets blamed for it, then he's going to lose. I mean, I don't know how you wiggle out of that. Most people, I think it's like only 40% of people trust Trump in this. They trust like the doctors and the CDC and everything else, meaning if it goes bad, Trump is not going to be able to explain himself in a way that the public is going to believe. The public is going to think he's lying just by definition. And so if that's somewhat of a wild card. But all things being equal, Biden has every weakness that Donald Trump has. The polling right now for Trump and Biden look almost similar to what it was for Trump and Clinton at the time. And Trump eventually won all of those states by double digits or, a little bit more. You also have the situation where I honestly believe this sexual abuse allegation lowers the vote total. And anything that lowers the vote total, I think it creates problems for Biden, especially with his inability and inarticulateness in trying to explain himself over anything that's not recorded, teleprompter, or, that type of stuff. So I think he has a hard way to go, even though I think Democrats are running this race like they're supposed to win it. It's just, I don't know. I think it's a toss-up, but I think I'll give it to Trump if somebody had a gun to my face and say who would do it. I think it's Trump.
Okay, now do you think there's anybody that Biden could appoint as vice president that would help him?
That's the question.
I'm thinking it's either going to be Elizabeth Warren to get the progressives or Amy Klobuchar to get the Midwest.
I think it's Warren. Believe it or not, I think it's Warren. I mean, the Warren and Biden had been getting closer together in some kind of thing that they were doing. And Sanders and Jayapal and AOC have been trying to get together with Warren to try to give her the progressive stigma to show, hey, the left has merged together again and here are these people together. Whether that works or not, I'm not sure. I think Biden, the last thing I saw, I think it was Politico. They said he was looking or debating between the black vote and the progressive vote. And if it's between those two, he already has the black vote. So it doesn't necessarily need to get a black woman for the job. And if you're getting anybody, I think he would try to make a play for lefties, even with Warren. So I think it might.
Yeah, but guess what? Guess what? Progressives aren't going to vote for her. They hate her.
She's not. That's the point, right?
Even me. I was a big fan of Warren. I was part of the draft Warren for Senate committee in 2012, and I would not vote for her because she betrayed Bernie.
I would go and make an affirmative vote against her, like by voting for a third party. I do. Yeah, she would not get that vote. But Biden doesn't know that. I don't think Biden knows that.
What do you think of Bernie having her? I couldn't even watch this one. At least the Postal Service one I watched and I commented. But the one with Warren and Jayapal, I'm still fine with, and whoever else was on that, I can't remember. Mark Pocan.
Yeah.
I still like them. But Warren, I'm not. And for him
I can't watch
to put her on, to try to give her credibility with his viewers and his supporters after what she did to him.
Did.
I mean, it was like, okay, so he confers with Obama. This is what we find out. He confers with Obama 4 times before he suspends his campaign. Obama single-handedly destroyed his campaign after Nevada by getting all those other people to drop out. So it was like Jesus conferring with Judas, as far as I was concerned, right?
Wait, Lauren, I have to end this because there's someone calling me. But look, I really appreciate you calling.
I'm going to let you go on mine.
This is Lauren Steiner from Robust Opposition. She's awesome. I always call her Pitbull. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate this, man.
All right. I just want to promote my show on Wednesday, tomorrow. Okay? Tomorrow, I'm interviewing Robert Kuttner, who's the co-founder of the American Prospect, and we're going to be talking about his latest article in the American Prospect, which is called The Zombie Invasion of Team Biden. And it's basically about all of the appointees that people are projecting him to have, like Larry Summers, holdouts from the Obama years, in his administration, and how tone deaf that is to the moment, and how bad that would be for the country. So I guess
that's good.
Yeah. So that's going to be tomorrow on my Facebook page at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. And thank you so much, Jamal.
No, I always appreciate these calls. We can have this thing going on for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
But I really do appreciate it. Your feelings seem like they're very similar to mine about what's taking place over 2020. So I appreciate our ability to kind of vent with this together. You have a good one, and please continue to be safe.
Okay, thank you. And everybody stay home, stay safe, and keep fighting.
All right, guys, like, share,